The war should have begun with fire. That was the expectation written into every doctrine, every projection, every simulation ever run on a species at humanity's level. When a superior force arrived, the weaker one panicked, resisted, fractured, and burned. It was a pattern so reliable it had stopped being theory and become something closer to physics. Cause, effect. Arrival, resistance. Resistance, extinction. But when the coalition fleets entered human space, none of it happened. The first world they approached was blue and alive, wrapped in cloud systems and artificial light, its orbital lanes crowded with satellites, traffic, the quiet signatures of a functioning civilization. It was exactly what they expected to see in the final moments before collapse. Orders were issued, targeting systems calibrated, communications arrays opened to deliver the standard declaration. And then, before a single word was transmitted, the planet went dark. Not partially, not chaotically, completely. Cities did not flicker or fail in sections. They vanished all at once, as if someone had reached down and closed a single switch. Orbiting stations powered down in perfect sequence. Surface grids shut off without fluctuation, without overload, without error. Within 12 seconds, a world that had been alive became a silent sphere of cold geometry. For a moment no one spoke, because this was not panic. Panic was messy. Panic left traces. This was precise. The fleet advanced anyway. They expected to find wreckage or bodies, or at the very least the residue of a population that had fled too late. Instead, they found cities intact, infrastructure untouched, systems dormant but undamaged. Transportation networks stood ready. Homes were filled with objects mid-use. Data centers were wiped clean with surgical accuracy, leaving only empty frameworks behind. It looked less like a civilization had fallen and more like it had stepped away. The same pattern repeated on the next world. And the next. Entire colonies, some dense, some remote. Each one transitioning from active to silent in flawless synchronization the moment coalition forces entered their range. No distress calls. No resistance. No attempt to negotiate. It was not surrender. It was something far stranger. Absence. Command began to adapt its assumptions. Perhaps humanity had retreated deeper into uncharted space. Perhaps they had scattered. Perhaps they had recognized the inevitability of the outcome and chosen survival over defiance. But that explanation did not hold for long, because nothing about the abandonment was rushed. Evacuation on this scale should have left fractures, collisions, delays, errors. Instead, every system suggested preparation. Long-term preparation. Supplies were gone, not abandoned. Critical components had been removed with intention. Even cultural artifacts, art, records, personal items, had been selectively taken, as if someone had decided very carefully what should be left behind and what must not be lost. Someone had planned this. And worse, someone had planned it knowing exactly when to execute it. The first outpost vanished 43 minutes after occupation began. No alarms triggered. No hostile signatures detected. One moment it was transmitting routine status updates, confirming control of the region. The next it was simply gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just absent from every system that had been tracking it. That was when the first real unease settled into the command structure. Because now there were two impossibilities. An enemy that refused to fight, and an enemy that could still strike. The silence stretched across human space like a held breath, heavy and unnatural, pressing against every sensor array and every assumption the coalition had brought with them. Fleets moved deeper, spreading control, mapping emptiness, trying to impose structure onto something that refused to behave. Then the message appeared. Not from a ship. Not from a planet. From everywhere. It slipped into every channel simultaneously, bypassing encryption, ignoring firewalls, embedding itself in systems that should not have been accessible. A single line of text, repeated across thousands of frequencies, identical in every translation. No origin point, no traceable path, just 5 words. Phase 1 complete. And for the first time since entering human space, the coalition realized they might not be witnessing the end of a war. They might be standing at the beginning of one they did not understand. At first, Command treated the message as a provocation. Not a threat, because threats implied confrontation, and humanity had shown no intention of engaging, but a signal designed to create uncertainty. Something psychological, something meant to slow momentum, that at least was familiar. Weaker species often resorted to symbolism when they had no material power left. But the longer the occupation continued, the harder it became to believe that explanation. Because nothing about what the coalition was encountering resembled collapse. Control of human space expanded rapidly. Fleet groups moved from system to system without resistance, establishing outposts, securing infrastructure, cataloging resources. On every world, the same pattern repeated with unnerving consistency. Cities stood silent but intact, their systems recoverable within hours. Transit networks reactivated cleanly. Power grids could be restarted. Even atmospheric processors and agricultural systems resumed function as if waiting for instructions. It was effortless. Too effortless. There were no supply shortages. No insurgent pockets. No scattered survivors attempting to resist or negotiate. Entire planets behaved like perfectly preserved shells, abandoned at the exact moment before destruction would have made recovery impossible. It should have been the most efficient conquest in recorded history. Instead, it began to feel like trespassing. The first anomaly was small enough to dismiss. A cargo convoy traveling between two secured systems reported minor navigational drift. Nothing catastrophic, just a slight deviation that forced a recalculation of its trajectory. The onboard systems logged it as a sensor error. Routine. Corrected within minutes. Then it happened again. Different convoy, different region, then a third time with no shared variables. By the end of the first cycle, long-range navigation across multiple sectors began showing irregularities. Not failures, never outright failure, but subtle distortions. Coordinates that shifted by fractions. Routes that took slightly longer than projected. Fuel consumption that exceeded expected margins by just enough to notice. It wasn't enough to stop operations. But it was enough to suggest interference. Command issued a systems audit across all fleets. No intrusions were found. No breaches, no foreign code, no external manipulation. Every diagnostic returned clean. Every safeguard remained intact. The networks were secure. The data was accurate. And yet the discrepancies continued. Then the supply delays began. Entire shipments arrived hours late with no identifiable cause. Others arrived exactly on time, but to the wrong coordinates. In one case, a fully automated logistics hub rerouted its inventory to a sector that had not yet been occupied, as if responding to instructions that no longer existed. Again, no traceable interference. Again, no explanation. The pattern spread slowly, carefully, never escalating fast enough to trigger emergency response. It was as if something was testing the system, probing its edges, learning its rhythms, and always staying just below the threshold of certainty. The first outpost loss had been unsettling. The second made it impossible to ignore. Unlike the first, this one left something behind. A transmission. It lasted less than half a second before collapsing into static, but it was enough for the recorders to capture a fragment. When analysts isolated the signal and reconstructed it, what they found was not a distress call. It was a report. Calm, structured, deliberate. Status confirmed, transition successful, proceeding to. The rest was gone. But the implication remained. Transition. Not destruction. Not attack. Transition. Command began to reevaluate. If humanity had retreated, where had they gone? There were no mass fleet signatures leaving their systems. No deep space migration trails. No evidence of large-scale movement beyond known routes. It was as if billions of individuals had simply ceased to exist within observable space. And yet, something was still here, watching. The next development came from an unexpected source. A data archive recovered from one of the abandoned colonies. A fragment overlooked during initial sweeps because it appeared incomplete. Most of its contents had been erased, but not cleanly. There were remnants, corrupted sections that resisted full deletion. When reconstruction algorithms were applied, a pattern emerged. Not records, not communications, simulations. Thousands of them, different scenarios, different variables, different enemy profiles, each one ending in failure, and then layered beneath them something else. Iterations. The same scenarios repeated with slight changes, adjustments, adaptations, improvements, until, in some cases, the outcome shifted. Victory. The analyst who first recognized the pattern hesitated before forwarding the report. Not because of uncertainty, but because of what it implied. These weren't random projections. They were rehearsals. The timestamp on the earliest file predated the coalition's expansion into this region by decades. Humanity hadn't reacted to the invasion. They had prepared for it. And if that was true, if this silence, this absence, this perfect evacuation had been planned in advance, then the question was no longer where humanity had gone. It was where they had chosen to fight. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. A listening station on the outer edge of occupied space registered a signal spike, brief, localized, almost identical to the anomaly that had preceded the first outpost disappearance. This time, the system flagged it in real time. For exactly 3 seconds, something moved through the station's sensors. Not a ship, not debris, something else. Then the station went dark. No explosion, no distress signal, just absence. And in the void it left behind, the same message appeared again, embedded across every channel before vanishing as quickly as it had come. Phase 2 initiated. This time, no one in command called it a provocation. Because now there was a pattern. And patterns meant intention. Whatever humanity had become in the silence they left behind, it was no longer waiting. It was beginning. By the time Phase 2 was acknowledged as real, it was already too late to contain. What began as minor inconsistencies and isolated disappearances evolved into something far more precise, something coordinated. Entire sectors started behaving unpredictably, not in ways that suggested damage or sabotage, but in ways that implied control. Systems did not fail. They adapted, just not for the coalition. A fleet stationed above one of the inner colonies reported a sudden fluctuation in artificial gravity. Not enough to cause casualties, but enough to disrupt formation. Ships drifted out of alignment, compensating automatically, recalibrating to restore stability. It should have been a routine correction, except the fluctuation happened again, and again, each time slightly different, each time forcing a new response. Within minutes, the fleet's internal systems were working harder than they should have been, adjusting continuously to variables that made no sense. The ships were not under attack, but they were no longer operating under stable conditions. Every correction introduced a new imbalance somewhere else, like trying to stand upright on a surface that subtly shifted beneath your feet. Then the communications array began to echo. Orders were issued, acknowledged, confirmed, and then repeated, not as interference but as duplication. Messages looped back into the system, slightly altered, just enough to create hesitation. A command to reposition became 2 commands, then 3, each with marginal differences. Which one was correct? Which one had been modified? The delay was only seconds, but in coordinated operations, seconds mattered. Across multiple sectors, similar distortions began to appear. Life support systems cycling inefficiently. Targeting arrays misaligning by fractions. Navigation grids updating too frequently. Introducing unnecessary recalculations. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that could be labeled as a direct attack. Just enough friction to erode certainty. Command escalated. Aggressive sweeps were ordered. Sensor nets expanded. Autonomous drones deployed in wide-range patterns, searching for any trace of the source. They found nothing. No ships. No emissions. No physical presence to target or destroy. And yet the interference grew more refined. The first confirmed loss without explanation triggered a full alert. A strike group, fully armed and operational, disappeared mid-maneuver. Not destroyed because destruction would have left debris, radiation, signatures. There was nothing. One moment the ships were executing a coordinated rotation, the next they were absent from every system simultaneously. Gone without transition. Gone without trace. The only clue left behind was a data fragment recovered from a nearby relay node. It had captured a burst of encrypted information at the exact moment of disappearance. When analysts forced decryption, what they uncovered was not alien code. It was human, not a language, a structure, a framework designed to rewrite operational parameters. It wasn't attacking the ships. It was rewriting the environment those ships depended on. The realization spread through command with a quiet, creeping weight. They were not being hunted in the traditional sense. They were being adjusted. The term that began appearing in internal reports was not war. It was displacement, because nothing humanity was doing fit within the existing categories of engagement. There were no battle lines, no front, no visible enemy to confront. Every attempt to respond directly resulted in further instability, as if the act of resistance itself fed into whatever system was manipulating the field. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. An analyst, one of the few tasked with reconstructing human data fragments, identified a recurring phrase embedded deep within multiple corrupted files. It appeared inconsistently, sometimes incomplete, sometimes layered beneath other code, but always in the same structural position. Layered war doctrine. First, it meant nothing. A concept without context. A label without explanation. But as more fragments were recovered, a pattern began to form. The doctrine did not describe a single method of combat. It described levels. Not sequentially, but simultaneously. Different layers operating at different scales. Physical, digital, environmental, psychological. Each one influencing the others. Not separate strategies, but interlocking systems designed to reshape the battlefield itself. The implication was staggering. Humans were not engaging the coalition on one front. They were engaging them on all fronts at once. And the coalition was only aware of the ones it could perceive. The first confirmed encounter shattered what remained of traditional assumptions. A deep-range sensor platform detected movement. Real movement, not anomaly, not distortion. Something was there. For the first time since the invasion began, a target existed. A response fleet was dispatched immediately. They arrived within minutes. What they found was a single structure drifting in open space, unpowered, barely detectable. It was small, insignificant by military standards. No weapons, no propulsion, nothing that suggested threat. Command ordered its capture. As the fleet moved into position, something changed. The structure activated. Not with energy, not with visible systems, but with presence. Every ship in the fleet experienced a simultaneous systems shift. Targeting arrays recalibrated without input. Navigation systems updated coordinates that had not been issued. Internal networks began processing data they had not received. For 3 seconds, the fleet was no longer operating under its own control. Then the structure vanished. And with it, the fleet. No explosion. No signal. Just absence. This time, there was no delay before the message appeared. Came instantly across every system, every channel, every layer the coalition had thought secure. Phase 3 active. By then, the meaning was no longer abstract. Each phase was not a step forward. It was a deeper layer. And the deeper they went, the less the coalition understood what kind of war they had entered. Because this enemy was not trying to overpower them. It was rewriting the rules they depended on. And somewhere, beyond the reach of their sensors, humanity was watching it all unfold. Learning, adjusting, and preparing for whatever came next. The first human fleet didn't arrive as an armada. It arrived as a question. 6 vessels emerged from slipspace at the edge of the system, too few to be considered a threat by any conventional doctrine, too deliberate to be ignored. Their formation was loose, almost casual, as if they had no need to present strength. They simply occupied space, quiet, controlled, and undeniably present. Inside the citadel, Overseer Talvin felt something shift that had nothing to do with sensors or tactical overlays. It was a pressure, subtle but insistent, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air becomes too heavy to ignore. They're not advancing. One of his analysts reported, confusion threading through her voice. No weapons primed. No targeting locks. They're waiting. Waiting for what? Talvin didn't answer. He was already watching the feed from the outer relay stations, where human transmissions were being intercepted and decoded in real time. The signals were structured, layered, almost polite. Not demands. Not threats. Something else. Patch it through, he ordered. The room fell silent as the transmission resolved, not into a barrage of encrypted data or military posturing, but into a single, steady voice. This is Envoy Elias Rook of the United Earth Coalition. We are here to open a dialogue. No titles. No declarations of dominance. No acknowledgement of the Dominion's authority. Just a statement simple, direct, and impossibly calm. Talvin felt irritation flicker beneath his composure. They think this is a negotiation, he murmured, after what they've done. But even as he said it, the words felt hollow, because the humans had not followed any recognizable pattern of conquest. They had dismantled the Dominion's forward fleets with precision, yes, but they had not pursued. They had not occupied. They had not even issued ultimatums. They had stopped. That was the part no one could explain. Respond, Talvin said finally, his voice steady. Acknowledge their presence. Demand their intentions. The reply came faster than expected, as if the humans had anticipated the question. Our intention is to prevent escalation, Rook's voice said. We believe further conflict is unnecessary. A ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber. Unnecessary? One of the generals echoed under his breath. They crippled 3 fleets and now they speak of restraint? Talvin raised a hand for silence, but his own thoughts were beginning to fracture along unfamiliar lines, because restraint implied choice, and choice implied control. How much more can they do? He wondered, not for the first time. Ask them, he said aloud, surprising even himself. Ask them what they're capable of. There was a pause, brief but long enough to feel intentional, before the response came. We are capable of ending this war, Rook said. Quickly. No elaboration. No demonstration. Just a statement, delivered with the same calm certainty as everything else. Talvin felt something colder than fear settle into his chest. Because the humans were not boasting. They were informing. And yet you haven't, he said, leaning closer to the console as if proximity might reveal something hidden in the transmission. Why? This time, the silence stretched longer. Across the system, the 6 human ships remained motionless, their signatures steady, their presence almost patient. When Rook finally spoke again, there was something different in his tone. Not emotion exactly, but wait. Because ending it that way would solve the immediate problem, he said. But it would create a larger one. Talvin's fingers tightened against the edge of the console. Explain. Another pause. Another deliberate choice. We have studied your history, Rook continued. We understand how your Dominion responds to defeat. Total collapse, followed by fragmentation, followed by cycles of internal conflict that last generations. A murmur of anger moved through the chamber, but Talvin did not silence it this time, because the statement was not entirely wrong. You presume much, he said, though the words lacked their usual edge. We observe patterns, Rook replied, and we have no interest in becoming the catalyst for another one. That was when it happened, the shift Talvin would later struggle to describe. Because for the first time since the war began, the humans were not speaking as adversaries. They were speaking as if they were responsible. For us, Talvin asked, the question slipping out before he could reshape it into something more controlled. For the outcome, Rook corrected gently. For what happens after this ends. The room fell into a deeper silence than before, one that carried something heavier than confusion. Responsibility was not a concept the Dominion associated with victory. Victory was leverage. Victory was dominance. Victory was the right to dictate terms without regard for consequence. But the humans were framing it differently, as if the end of the war was not the objective, as if what came after mattered more. Talvin felt the ground of his certainty begin to erode. "Then what do you want?" he asked, the question sharper now, edged with something that might have been frustration, or something closer to unease. There was no hesitation this time. "We want a future where this doesn't happen again," Rook said. "Simple, direct, impossible. And you believe that can be achieved through dialogue?" Talvin pressed. "We believe it can be achieved through choice," Rook replied. "Yours as much as ours." Talvin almost laughed at that. Almost. But something stopped him. Because the humans had already demonstrated that they did not need the Dominion's cooperation to win. They could end this quickly, as they had said. And yet they were here, waiting, offering something that looked dangerously like restraint, or worse, trust. "Why would we choose differently?" Talvin asked quietly. "Why would we not rebuild, rearm, and return stronger?" The answer came without delay. "Because you've already seen what happens when you do," Rook said. Talvin's gaze flicked to the tactical displays, to the wreckage of fleets that had once been considered untouchable. "Yes," he said slowly, "we have. And because," Rook continued, "if you choose not to, you won't be alone." That was new. Talvin felt the words settle into the room like something fragile and dangerous. "Explain," he said again, but this time the demand lacked its earlier force. "There are other ways to exist in this system," Rook said. "Other ways to engage with the species you've subjugated. Ways that don't end in cycles of destruction." A flicker of anger returned, sharper now. "You expect us to dismantle centuries of structure? To abandon the foundation of our power because you ask it?" "No," Rook said. "We expect you to consider what that foundation has cost you." The words hit harder than any weapon. Because cost was something the Dominion understood intimately, but only in terms of resources, of fleets, of territory. Not in terms of what it had become. Talvin felt a strange, unfamiliar pressure build behind his eyes, something he could not categorize or dismiss. "You're asking for more than surrender," he said quietly. "Yes," Rook replied. "We are. And if we refuse?" The answer came, calm and unyielding. "Then we end it," Rook said. No threat, no escalation in tone, just a statement of fact. Talvin believed him. That was the problem. Because for the first time in his career, he was facing an opponent who did not need to prove their power, and chose not to use it fully anyway. An opponent who offered a path forward that did not align with any known strategy. An opponent who seemed to care more about what the Dominion might become than what it currently was. And Talvin realized, with a clarity that felt almost like vertigo, that this was the real battlefield. Not the fleets. Not the territory. The choice. He looked at the silent human ships, at the calm, waiting presence that had disrupted everything he thought he understood about war. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which option was more dangerous. To fight them, or to listen. Talvin did not answer immediately. For the first time since the war began, the overseer of the Dominion, architect of 3 successful expansion campaigns, strategist of a doctrine built on inevitability, hesitated. Not because he lacked information, but because for the first time, information was no longer enough. Choice. The word lingered in his mind like something invasive. Behind him, the chamber had fractured into quiet, urgent conversations. Generals whispering probabilities. Analysts recalculating threat models that no longer aligned with observable behavior. The Dominion was built to respond to force, to counter escalation with escalation, to dominate or be dominated. There was no framework for this. "They're manipulating you," General Varick said sharply, stepping forward. "This is psychological warfare. They want us uncertain, off balance." Talvin didn't look at him. "We are uncertain," he said. "That is not something they created. It is something they revealed." Varick's jaw tightened. "Then we correct it. We mobilize the inner fleets. We force them to show their hand." "And if their hand is worse than we assume?" Talvin asked quietly. Silence answered him this time. Because that was the question none of them had been willing to ask out loud. Talvin turned back to the console. "Envoy Rook," he said, voice steady once more. "You've made your position clear. But you are asking for a structural transformation of a civilization you do not belong to. Yes, Rook said. Then you will provide more than statements, Talvin continued. You will provide proof. There was a brief pause, and for the first time, something like anticipation flickered across the human transmission channel. What kind of proof? Rook asked. Talvin's gaze hardened. You claim you are capable of ending this war quickly. Demonstrate it. Not against us. He paused, choosing the words carefully. Against yourselves. The chamber went still. Even Varric turned sharply toward him. Overseer. Silence, Talvin said, not raising his voice. He kept his focus on the transmission. Show us that your restraint is not weakness, he said. Show us that you can choose not to use your full capability, even when it costs you. This time, the pause was longer. Across the system, the 6 human ships remained motionless, but something changed. Not in their position, but in the data streams surrounding them. Energy signatures shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. They're doing something, an analyst whispered. Talvin felt it too, not through sensors but through instinct. The same instinct that had guided him through a dozen battles. This was it. You're asking for a demonstration of self-limitation, Rook said slowly. I am asking you to prove that your philosophy is real, Talvin replied. Not convenient. Another silence. Then, understood. The transmission cut. For a moment nothing happened. Then the nearest human vessel moved. Not toward the Dominion fleets. Not into attack formation. It turned slowly, deliberately, toward one of its own ships. What are they doing? Varric demanded. No one answered. Because the answer was already forming, and no one wanted to say it first. The lead human ship powered up. Not its weapons, at least not in any configuration the Dominion recognized. The energy buildup was different. Focused inward, contained, like a star being compressed into something smaller, denser, impossibly controlled. Energy spike exceeding projected thresholds. An analyst reported, her voice tight. If that discharges, it will destroy both vessels, another finished. Talvin's breath slowed. They're not targeting us, he said. No, Varric replied, his certainty cracking. They're targeting themselves. The transmission channel reactivated. Rook's voice returned, unchanged. You wanted proof, he said. The human ship fired. There was no flash, no explosion. Just a moment, brief, almost invisible, where space itself seemed to fold. And then one of the human vessels was gone. Not damaged. Not disabled. Gone. The second ship, the one that had fired, remained in place, its energy signature dropping rapidly, systems stabilizing as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The chamber erupted into noise. That's impossible. They erased it. No debris, no radiation. What kind of weapon? Talvin didn't hear them. He was staring at the empty space where a ship had been. Explain, he said. His voice quieter than it had ever been. Rook didn't hesitate. That was a controlled singularity collapse, he said. Localized. Contained. The target vessel was evacuated prior to execution. Talvin's mind struggled to keep up. You destroyed your own ship. Yes. Why? A pause. Then, with the same calm certainty that had defined every word since this began. Because we could, Rook said. And because we chose when to stop. The meaning settled over the room like a weight. They're showing us control, one of the analysts whispered. No, Talvin said, his eyes still fixed on the void. They're showing us restraint. Because that ship, whatever it had been, was not a trivial asset. It represented resources, time, capability. And the humans had erased it without hesitation. Not out of desperation. Out of demonstration. They can do that to us, Varric said, the words barely contained. Talvin nodded slowly. Yes. And they didn't. The realization landed harder than the act itself. The transmission continued. We have the capacity to end this conflict in ways that would leave no room for recovery, Rook said. You needed to understand that. Talvin finally looked away from the void, back to the console. And this, he said carefully. Is your argument for restraint? It is our argument for choice, Rook replied. Power without control is destruction. Control without power is irrelevant. We have both. The simplicity of it was almost unbearable. Talvin felt something fracture. Not in his authority, not in his position, but in the framework that had defined every decision he had ever made. Because the humans were not offering peace from a position of weakness. They were offering it from a position of overwhelming, undeniable capability. And they were choosing not to use it. Why show us this? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Because you asked for proof, Rook said. And because you needed to understand what the alternative looks like. Talvin closed his eyes for a brief moment. He saw the Dominion fleets, the systems under their control, the structure of power that had taken centuries to build. And he saw it gone, not conquered, erased. When he opened his eyes again, the room felt different, smaller, quieter. Overseer, Varric began, but Talvin raised a hand. Not now, not yet, because the decision that had once seemed inevitable was no longer clear. Fight and risk annihilation, or accept and become something unrecognizable. He looked at the remaining human ships, still waiting, still patient, still offering a choice. And for the first time in his life, Talvin understood something that had never been part of Dominion doctrine. Power wasn't the ability to destroy. It was the ability to decide not to. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, but carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Envoy Rook, he said. You've made your point. A pause. Then, good, Rook replied. Talvin's next words came slower, more deliberate. Now explain something else. Go on. Talvin glanced once more at the empty space where a ship had ceased to exist. If you're willing to destroy your own, what are you willing to become to avoid destroying us? This time, the silence that followed felt different. Not calculated. Not strategic. Something deeper. And when Rook finally spoke, his answer didn't resolve the question. It made it far more dangerous. That, he said quietly, depends on whether you give us a reason to find out. The silence that followed did not break cleanly. It stretched, heavy and unresolved, like a fracture running through the center of the chamber. No one spoke at first, not because they had nothing to say, but because every possible response now carried consequences that extended far beyond strategy. Talvin remained still, his gaze fixed on the projection of empty space where a human vessel had been erased with surgical precision. That absence had weight now. It lingered in the room like a warning that didn't need to be repeated. They just rewrote the rules. One of the senior analysts said quietly, almost to herself. No, Talvin replied without turning. They showed us the rules we've been ignoring. Behind him, General Varric stepped forward again, more controlled now, but no less intense. Overseer, this changes nothing about the core equation. They have power, we respond with power. That is how balance is maintained. Talvin turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. Balance, he said. You still believe this is balance? Varric didn't hesitate. If we concede now, we lose more than territory. We lose authority, structure, identity. And if we don't? Talvin asked. Varric's answer came slower this time. Then we test the limits of what they've shown us. There it was. The old doctrine, stripped to its core. Push until resistance breaks, or you do. Talvin looked back at the display, at the human ships that had not moved, had not advanced, had not exploited the advantage they had just made undeniable. They were still waiting. Envoy Rook, Talvin said, his voice cutting through the chamber once more. You've demonstrated capability. You've demonstrated restraint. But you're asking us to gamble the continuity of our civilization on your intent. Yes, Rook said simply. Talvin exhaled slowly. That is not a small ask. No, Rook agreed. It isn't. The honesty of it made it worse. Then understand our position, Talvin continued. We cannot make that decision in isolation. The Dominion is not a single mind. There are factions, command structures, Entire sectors that will not accept a shift of this magnitude without resistance. We're aware, Rook said. Then you understand what happens next, Talvin said, his tone tightening. If I even suggest this path without overwhelming justification, it will trigger internal instability. Splinter groups, unauthorized mobilizations, possibly civil conflict. This time, the pause on the human side was shorter but heavier. We expected that, Rook said. Talvin's eyes narrowed slightly. You expected it. Yes. And you still came here, Talvin said. Yes. The answer landed with a quiet finality that unsettled something deeper than strategy. Then you're not just trying to end a war, Talvin said slowly. You're trying to reshape what comes after it, whether we're ready or not. Rook didn't deny it. We're trying to prevent something worse, he said. Before Talvin could respond, the chamber lights shifted, subtle at first, then urgent as a system-wide alert cut through every console simultaneously. Overseer. An operator's voice snapped, sharp with alarm. Multiple unauthorized fleet activations in the outer sectors. Command signatures don't match central authorization. Varric turned instantly. Who? Sector 9, 12, and... The operator hesitated, then continued. 17. Talvin felt the impact of that like a physical force. 17. That wasn't just a sector. That was a stronghold, one of the Dominion's most hardline command regions. Loyal to expansion doctrine. Resistant to any form of diplomatic deviation. They're mobilizing, Varric said, the tension in his voice now edged with something close to vindication. You see? This is exactly what I warned about. Talvin didn't respond immediately. He was already watching the incoming data streams, watching as ships lit up across multiple systems, their trajectories aligning not toward the human fleet, but toward the core. They're not just mobilizing, he said quietly. They're converging. For defense? Someone asked. No, Talvin said, because he recognized the pattern. It wasn't defensive. It was corrective. They're moving to reassert control, he continued, which means they've already classified this as a failure of central authority. Varric's expression darkened. Then we act now. We consolidate loyal fleets and do what? Talvin cut in sharper now. Fight our own while facing an external force we don't fully understand? If we don't, we lose control entirely, Varric snapped. Talvin didn't answer, because for the first time both outcomes looked equally catastrophic. The transmission channel flickered back to life. We're detecting the same movements, Rook said. Your internal networks are not subtle. Talvin let out a quiet, humorless breath. No, he said. They aren't. You're running out of time, Rook added. That was the first time the human envoy had introduced pressure into the conversation. And it changed everything. Talvin straightened slightly. Then be clear, he said. What happens if those fleets engage? Not us, each other. Another pause. This one wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. We intervene, Rook said. The words hit the chamber like a shockwave. You what? Varric demanded, stepping forward again. You don't get to intervene in Dominion internal affairs. If those internal affairs result in system-wide destabilization. Rook interrupted, his tone still calm but now carrying an edge of finality. They stop being internal. Talvin felt the shift immediately. This was no longer about diplomacy. This was a line. You would engage Dominion forces inside our own territory, he said carefully. If it prevents a cascade event that affects surrounding systems. Rook replied, yes. Varric let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. So this is it. The real objective. Control under the guise of stability. No, Rook said. This is containment under the reality of consequence. Talvin raised a hand again, silencing further escalation from his side. His focus remained locked on the transmission. You're escalating, he said. We're responding to escalation, Rook corrected. Talvin's mind moved quickly now, threading through possibilities, outcomes, probabilities that no longer behave the way they should. Because the humans had just expanded the scope of the conflict. Not by attacking, by setting boundaries, and backing them with capability that had already been proven. If we attempt to contain our own factions, Talvin said slowly, you will hold position? Yes. And if we fail? Another pause. Short, precise. Then we act, Rook said. The clarity of it left no room for misinterpretation. Talvin looked around the chamber, at the faces of his command staff, at the data streams showing fleets accelerating toward a confrontation that would fracture the Dominion from within, at the empty space where a human ship had been erased, not as a threat but as a demonstration. And for the first time he understood the full weight of the situation. This wasn't a negotiation between two powers. It was a narrowing corridor, every option closing except one. Fight, and trigger not just external destruction but internal collapse. Or choose something that would redefine everything the Dominion had ever been. Overseer, Varric said, his voice lower now, more controlled. Give the order. Talvin didn't move, because this was the moment. Not the battle, not the treaty. The decision that would determine whether the Dominion remained what it had always been, or became something else entirely. He leaned forward slightly, activating a priority channel that would broadcast across every command network still under his authority. But before he spoke, he said one more thing. Not to his people, to the human envoy. If I do this, Talvin said, his voice quieter now but carrying through the chamber with absolute clarity. There is no return to what we were. I know, Rook replied. Talvin closed his eyes for the briefest moment, then opened them. And if I don't, he said, there may not be anything left at all. Rook didn't answer. He didn't need to, because for the first time, Talvin understood something the humans had known from the beginning. This wasn't about winning. It was about what survived after. Talvin drew in a slow breath and began to speak. But the first words he chose were not what anyone in the chamber expected. The words did not echo. They did not rise with force or command the way Dominion orders were meant to. They were spoken evenly, almost quietly, but carried across every secured channel with an authority that came not from volume, but from finality. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the reactions began. Across Sector 9, a formation of heavy cruisers already aligned for transit halted mid-sequence, their engines idling in a state of suspended intent. In Sector 12, a carrier group slowed its acceleration curve, awaiting clarification that did not come. But in Sector 17, the stronghold, there was no hesitation. They're ignoring the order, an operator said, voice tightening. 17 Command is overriding central authority. Talvin didn't look away from the feed. Patch them through. A new channel forced itself open, cutting through layers of protocol with brute authority. The face that appeared was older, harder, Commander Rest, a figure Talvin knew well enough to predict the shape of his response before he spoke. Overseer, Rest said, his tone measured but edged with open defiance. Your directive has been received and rejected. The chamber tensed, but Talvin remained still. On what grounds? He asked. On the grounds that it compromises Dominion continuity, Rest replied without hesitation. We have verified external interference. We have confirmed your engagement with a hostile force under non-combat parameters. That constitutes a breach of command integrity. Varric shifted slightly behind Talvin, but said nothing. You're preparing to engage central systems, Talvin said. We are preparing to restore control, Rest corrected. Your current course invites collapse. Talvin let the silence sit for a moment, not as hesitation, but as calculation. And you believe escalation prevents that. I believe strength prevents that, Rest said. Something you appear to have forgotten. The words might have carried insult once. Now they felt like something else. History repeating itself. Talvin leaned forward slightly. You've seen the human demonstration. I've seen a display, Rest said. A calculated one. Designed to provoke exactly this response. Division, hesitation, weakness. And if it wasn't? Talvin asked. Rest's expression didn't change. Then they would have used it already. That was the logic. Clean, efficient, familiar, and incomplete. They didn't, Talvin said quietly. Not yet, Rest replied. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence carried pressure. Two ideologies colliding, neither willing to yield. They've given us a window, Talvin said. A choice. Rest's eyes narrowed slightly. No, Overseer. They've given you an illusion of one. Talvin felt something settle into place. Not doubt, not certainty, but clarity. Because Rest wasn't wrong. But he wasn't right either. You're mobilizing fleets toward the core, Talvin said. If you proceed, you trigger a chain reaction, internal conflict on a scale we've never managed before. If we don't proceed, Rest countered, we allow an external force to dictate our evolution. Talvin's gaze hardened. They're not dictating. They're offering. Rest let out a short, humorless breath. You've already accepted it. No, Talvin said. I'm considering it. That's enough, Rest replied. Behind Talvin, the data feeds updated again. Fleet trajectories tightening, convergence points locking in. Time was collapsing inward. 17 will proceed, Rest continued. Other sectors are aligning. You can either reassert command now or step aside. There it was. The breaking point. Talvin looked at the projection, at the lines of movement that would, within hours, turn the Dominion inward against itself. Then he looked at the human ships. Still there. Still waiting. Not intervening. Not yet. Envoy Rook, Talvin said without turning, opening the channel again. I'm here, Rook replied immediately. You're hearing this, Talvin said. Yes. Talvin's voice lowered slightly. If this escalates, how long before you act? A pause. Then, minutes, Rook said. The chamber reacted, a ripple of tension snapping through the room. Your positioning already, Varric muttered. Yes, Rook said without apology. Talvin closed his eyes briefly. Minutes. That was all the distance left between decision and consequence. He opened them again and looked at Rest's image. You believe strength preserves us, Talvin said. It always has, Rest replied. Talvin nodded once. Then understand this. He leaned closer to the console, his voice no longer quiet, no longer restrained, but not raised either. It didn't need to be. The humans just demonstrated a capability that renders our definition of strength obsolete, he said. You want to test that? You want to see how far it goes? Rest didn't answer immediately. For the first time, there was the smallest flicker of uncertainty. That's exactly what they want, he said finally. No, Talvin replied. It's exactly what they're trying to avoid. Rest's jaw tightened. Then they should have stayed out of this. They didn't start this, Talvin said. No, Rest agreed. We did. The admission hung there, heavier than anything that had been said so far. And for a moment, just a moment, the two of them stood on the same ground. Then Rest straightened. And we will finish it, he said. The channel cut. 17 fleet entering jump sequence. An operator called out. Multiple groups following. Talvin watched the trajectories lock in. Watched the moment slip. This was it. Not a battle. A decision that would echo through everything that came after. Varric stepped closer. Overseer, we still have loyal forces. Give the order. We can intercept, contain. No, Talvin said. Varric froze. No, Talvin didn't look at him. Because containment isn't the problem, he said. The problem is what we become if this continues. Varric's voice dropped. And what do we become if we stop? Talvin didn't answer immediately, because that question had no clean answer. Only a direction. He turned back to the console, activating the command channel again, this time not just to the sectors, not just to the fleets, but to the entire Dominion network. Every system, every command node, every voice that still believed in what they were. This is Overseer Talvin, he said. The transmission spread instantly. Across ships already in motion, across stations preparing for conflict, across commanders waiting for confirmation of the path forward. I am issuing a full operational halt, he continued. All fleets are to disengage and power down primary weapon systems immediately. A surge of reactions flooded the network. Questions, objections, outright refusals. But Talvin didn't stop. This is not a tactical withdrawal, he said. This is a strategic decision. He paused. And in that pause, everything balanced. We are not at war with the humans, he said. The words hit harder than any command. We are at war with the consequences of what we've been. Silence. Then chaos. Channels flaring, voices rising, disbelief rippling through the structure of a civilization that had never heard anything like this from its own command. Overseer, Varric began, but Talvin raised a hand. Not to silence him, to steady himself. Because this was the point of no return. We can continue on this path, Talvin said into the channel, his voice unwavering now. We can prove our strength in the only way we've ever understood it. He looked once more at the empty space where a ship had vanished. And we will be erased by something that understands it better. The chamber went still again. Not with confusion, with realization. Talvin took a breath. And if we stop, he said, quieter now, we become something we don't yet understand. Another pause. Longer this time. Deliberate. But we survive long enough to find out. The network held. Balanced between obedience and rebellion. Between history and something else. And then, one by one, fleet signatures began to slow. Not all, but enough. Talvin watched the data shift, watched the trajectory of collapse hesitate. Just slightly. A fragile, impossible moment. Until multiple 17-class warships have completed jump. An operator said, voice tight again. They're inside the inner boundary. Talvin's gaze snapped back to the display. Too late. The fracture had already begun. And somewhere beyond the edge of that moment, the human fleet moved. The human ships did not surge forward. They didn't scatter, didn't form attack vectors, didn't even accelerate in any way that resembled urgency. Instead, they shifted subtly, precisely, into positions that did not aim at the Dominion fleets but around them, encircling nothing, or everything. What are they doing? Varric whispered, for once not as a challenge, but as a question he did not want answered. Talvin didn't reply. He was watching the overlay adjust in real time, watching invisible geometries take shape across the system. Lines of influence, not firepower. Points of pressure, not impact. They're mapping containment zones, an analyst said, voice hollow. Not for us. For the entire conflict space. That was when the first 17 warship opened fire. It wasn't aimed at the humans. It struck a Dominion cruiser attempting to comply with Talvin's halt order. The blast tore through its midsection, splitting it apart in a bloom of light and debris that scattered across the inner boundary like a signal flare. And just like that, the war turned inward. Multiple engagements, the operator shouted. 17 forces engaging loyalist units. This is full fragmentation. Talvin felt it then. Not shock, not fear, loss. Not of ships or territory, but of control, of cohesion, of something that had once felt unbreakable. Envoy Rook, he said, already knowing. We're acting, Rook replied. There was no delay, no warning. The human formation completed its shift, and the system changed. Not visually, not violently, but fundamentally. Every Dominion vessel, every single one, experienced it at the same time. Weapons systems went dark. Not powered down. Disconnected. Targeting arrays lost synchronization. Firing solutions dissolving mid-calculation. Energy cores remained active, engines still responsive, but anything designed to harm another vessel simply ceased to function. What is happening? Varric demanded. Weapon systems are offline across all fleets, an operator said, disbelief cracking through every word. No override access. It's like they've been removed from the network. Talvin stared at the data, at the impossible uniformity of it. They didn't disable us, he said slowly. They changed the rules. Across the battlefield, ships that had been seconds away from firing drifted into stunned stillness. Others, already mid-engagement, found themselves suddenly incapable of continuing. The chaos didn't stop, but it transformed. Confusion replaced destruction. Momentum collapsed into hesitation. "They've neutralized the conflict," the analyst whispered. "No," Talvin said, his voice quiet with something deeper than awe. "They've neutralized the ability to escalate." The transmission channel opened again. "We've isolated all offensive systems within the engagement sphere," Rook said. "No weapons will function until stability is restored." Varric stepped forward, anger returning in sharp, controlled bursts. "You've just imposed control over our entire military infrastructure." "No," Rook replied. "We've removed the option that was about to destroy it." Talvin raised a hand again, stopping the escalation before it could reform. "How long?" he asked. A pause. "As long as it takes," Rook said. Talvin let that settle, because that wasn't a tactical answer. That was a statement of intent. Across the system, the effects were already cascading. Ships that had relied on dominance through force now found themselves forced into something unfamiliar: communication. Signals flared across channels that had been silent for years. Commanders who had only known how to issue orders now had to negotiate, coordinate, or simply wait. The war had not ended, but it could no longer continue the way it had. And that changed everything. 17 Fleet is attempting manual override, an operator reported. "Will it work?" Varric asked. "No," Talvin said before anyone else could answer, because he understood now. This wasn't a hack. It wasn't interference. It was something deeper, something structural. "They didn't target our systems," he said. "They targeted the assumptions those systems are built on." Varric looked at him, confusion breaking through frustration. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," Talvin replied. "It just has to work." The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence was different. Not tense, not fractured. Still, for the first time since the war began, there was no immediate next move. No escalation path. No advantage to seize. Just space, time, choice. Talvin exhaled slowly and leaned back slightly, the weight of everything settling. Not crushing, but reshaping. "Envoy Rook," he said, his voice no longer edged with resistance. "You've made your intervention. Yes. You've removed our ability to destroy each other. Yes." Talvin paused, then asked the question that had been forming since the beginning. "What happens now?" This time, Rook didn't answer immediately. And when he did, the words were simpler than anything that had come before. "Now you decide who you are without it." The transmission held. The system held. And across the Dominion, something unfamiliar began to take root. Not surrender. Not defeat. Possibility. Talvin looked out at the projection of his civilization. Fractured, halted, uncertain, and felt something he had no name for begin to settle into place. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It was recognition of a path that had not existed before, of a future that could not be forced into old shapes. Behind him, Varric spoke again, quieter now. "And if they never give it back?" he asked. Talvin considered that, then shook his head slightly. "They will," he said. Varric frowned. "How can you be sure?" Talvin looked once more at the empty space where a human ship had erased itself. Not to win, but to prove something. "Because they already chose not to use it when they didn't have to," he said. The answer settled into the room like a foundation being laid. Outside, the stars remained still. The fleets remained intact. And for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the outcome of a war was not being decided by who could destroy more, but by who was willing to become something else. Far beyond the inner boundary, the human ships held their positions, quiet and patient, as if they understood something the Dominion was only beginning to grasp. That power was never the end of the story, only the moment where you decided what came next. And this time, for the first time, that decision didn't belong to the strongest force in the system. It belonged to everyone who had survived it.